This segment brought to you by Bravo Company USA. This episode is produced by CCW Safe and FTA. Hey, I'm Larry Vickers. Welcome to the Larry Vickers podcast, brought to you by Firearms Trainers Association. Now, we got a good friend of mine, a special guest this time, a guy, outstanding guy, one of the best people I know in the industry, Jack Carr, very successful writer whose career has went off like a rocket ship. Thank you, my friend, for joining us. I've known Jack for a number of years. What's that?
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This is awesome. I love the podcast studio. Everything's looking great. This is amazing. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Known you for many years. Our buddy Monty LeClaire introduced us. Met you many years ago now. 1911 class, I believe me and Ken taught out in Cali. Right. Fast forward, I'd run into you every year at SHOT Show and we'd talk and whatnot. And then I remember a few years ago, right before you were retiring, I said, so what are you going to do when you get out? And you go, I'm going to write novels. And dude, that blew me away. If you'd have asked me, what do you think I'm going to do? Writing novels would have never even been on my list. And I thought, well, my thing was, I'm sure like a lot of people, well, he'll give it a shot, and this and that and the other. And after a while, probably figure out, well, it's not really going to, it's not going to pay the bills or put food on the table. So I got to do something else. Like a lot of guys in the military do. They I'm going to go down this path. And then they realize, that's not really what I thought it was going to be. So they kind of deviate back to what they're more comfortable with. Obviously, with you broke the mold and you have taken off. Your career has been off the chart. How did you ever get around to where this is what you wanted to do? How did that ever come about?
Yeah, well, I kept my cards pretty close in the SEAL teams, and that was way before the tipping point of the No Easy Day book and the Act of Valor Hollywood movie type thing. So even well before then, I knew that one day when I transitioned from military service that I would write thrillers. And that comes from very early on in life, me wanting to do two things. One, serve my country in uniform, and the other, write thrillers in this genre. And that's because when I grew up in the 80s, I knew I wanted to be a SEAL very early on. And the research that I did at the local library, my mom was a librarian, so I grew up surrounded by books and a love of reading. But the research that you could do back then, there was hardly anything written about special operations in general.
Yeah, that's right.
SEALs. There's a couple of magazine articles here and there, a couple mentions in a couple of different books, but this is early 80s time frame. So I knew that I was going to serve my country. And then I started reading these books that had protagonists with backgrounds, so fictional backgrounds that I wanted to have in real life one day. So written by guys like Tom Clancy and Nelson DeMille and David Morrell and A.J. Cornell and J.C. Pollock, and all these guys whose heroes of the novels had backgrounds. Typically, they were SF guys in Vietnam, or they were attached to some CIA program in Vietnam. A couple were SEALs in Vietnam. So I loved reading these novels, and I knew that one day after my time in the military, I'd write books just like this. So really what was happening is I was giving myself an education in the art of storytelling, being a fan of the genre, by being a reader first. So I was reading all those things, but then I was also studying. I was studying warfare. I was studying insurgencies and counterinsurgencies and terrorism. Some of my earliest memories are of the 1979 Iranian hostage crisis. Cronkite there on TV, counting down how many days that they had been held hostage. I remember Desert One. I remember those pictures on the front of the newspaper. And then a few years later, I remember the Beirut Marine barracks bombing. I remember seeing that. I remember the TWA hijacking on the cover of Time magazine and Newsweek. So during that very formative time of my youth, when I'm studying all these things, that they're making an impact, both on the fiction side of the house and then on the nonfiction side of the house in studying what I wanted to do in uniform one day. So all that kind of came together at the right time and place as I was getting out and started writing. And the first book, The Terminal List, was the result.
How long were you working on Terminal List before you got out? Were you already starting to work on that stuff?
Yep. So as you know, and as anyone else who served in the military knows, when you drop your papers and tell them you're getting out, you go in this different pile.
Yeah.
And then my last year and a couple months, my job was to get out of this gigantic bureaucracy. So all of a sudden, instead of getting ready to be a commanding officer, which was the track that I was on, well, now I went in this other pile, and now my job is to go to dental, to go to medical, to get right out of these different programs that I was read into, stand in the lines, turn in gear, sign a bunch of papers. And each one of these things you set an appointment for. So you go and you set up an appointment, and then you come back and you wait for that appointment. You go stand in line again. So point being, I had some time, and I knew that it was time to transition, take a breath, figure out what I was going to do next. I knew I was writing, so it was during that time that I started writing. And I wrote down about 5 or 6, 7 different ideas for that first novel, and then I chose the one that I thought would be the most visceral, the most hard-hitting out of the gate, the one that was most likely to get noticed by a New York publishing house. And it was very evident to me that The Terminal List was that novel, that theme of revenge. I loved reading books about revenge growing up. I loved movies with that theme, and I knew that was the one to start with.
Cool. Now, how far down the chain were you before you got noticed? But in Simon & Schuster is the one that's publishing your books, right?
That's right.
How far down the line before you got hooked up with them for them to pick the book up?
Yep. So I sent it to Simon & Schuster through a friend who was a SEAL, got into finance, and he sat next to this author, Brad Thor, at one of these SEAL Foundation type event things. And then he helped him with a couple of his books with the special operations side of those. And he knew that I was starting to write. And he said, hey, do you want to talk to this guy, Brad Thor? He could probably give you a couple tips. And I said, yeah, I'd love to talk to him. That'd be amazing. And so he set up a call. I talked to Brad Thor. And essentially what he told me was, hey, don't call me over the next year. But if you actually write this thing, I'll introduce you to my publisher. Can't guarantee they'll like it. Can't guarantee they'll even open it. But if, as a thank you for some of the things that your friend told me you did in the SEAL teams, I can make that introduction for you. And I said, that's all I need. And he said, when are you going to be done? And I said, a year from today. And then I called him back a year to the day and said, it's done. And it was really cool because to his credit, he said, well, is it done or is it the best that you can possibly make it? And I said, well, I could probably edit it a little bit because I was just finished. And so I spent another 4 months reading, editing, rereading, editing. And then I called him in November of 2016 and said, it's as good as I can get it. And he said, all right, here's the address, send it. They're waiting on it.
Wow.
Dropped it in the mail, and next thing you know, a couple of weeks later, I got a call from Simon & Schuster that said they wanted it. So flew out to New York, and I think they wanted to make sure I wasn't a crazy person. So sat down with the editor, publisher, and had a nice 2-hour-long coffee, and she was amazing, Emily Vessler, who did the Vince Flynn books, Brad Thor books, now mine, and had a great conversation. And she said, we want this thing, but you need an agent. And I had no idea I needed an agent. And so she introduced me to 4, and I picked one, and next thing you know, we're off to the races.
Wow, cool. Now, I remember talking to you at SHOT Show. It might have even been this last one. The lead time for the books, like you launch one, you're already well on your way to the next one, right? How does that work out?
That's right. So the first book that you do on the fiction side of the house, you have to have it done. So that's different than the nonfiction side. So if you're writing a book about your experiences in the military, that's nonfiction. You can get an advance for that. You can sell an idea. You can sell a chapter, an outline. So for fiction, you have to have it completely finished. So your first book takes as long as it takes to get it to where you want it before you show it to somebody else. Typically, that's an agent first, which is not how I did it. But typically, you show it to an agent. You get picked up by that agent, and then they know what imprints of what publishers are looking for what kind of books, and so they can kind of focus their efforts on getting it to the right place. So that's typically how it goes for your first one. Then if you get a deal for this kind of a novel, the expectation is that there's one a year. And that wasn't really how things were until Stephen King started doing that, Clive Cussler started doing that, and then really in the mid to late 90s, that became the norm. So one a year. So now it has to be one a year, and I'm still refining that process of how far I have to be along before I send it to them, and then they read it and send it back to me with their notes and all that. But the whole process is essentially a year now.
Now I know a couple things. So you've got 3 books out, right?
That's right.
Currently working on a 4th. The 3 books let's make sure everybody knows.
Yeah, right over my shoulder there. So The Terminal List is the first one. True Believer is the second one, which is really a story about redemption. And then the third one, Savage Son, is the one that made the New York Times list right out of the gate this last spring. And it's the one I wanted to write first, but I knew that the characters weren't at a place where it would be, I needed to get them to a place where I could explore the themes of Savage Son.
Got it.
exploring that dark side of man through the dynamic of hunter and hunted. But for the first, I knew they weren't quite there yet. Right. So I had to go with that theme of revenge for the first book, then into the story of redemption and transition for that second one, and then got to explore.
Got it. So like prequels in a way. You had to set things up. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I just set it up. Yeah, I wanted to write that third one first, but I just knew it wasn't right, so I went all in on that theme of revenge. And there's a couple different ways to read that one too, especially for people that have been downrange, because it's also about someone who takes the tactics, techniques, procedures of the enemy that work so well against us in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he brings those home to home soil, to this country. And then a little deeper, it's really about a guy who brings those wars to the front doors of people who have been sending young men and women to their deaths now for close to 20 years.
Cool. Now, next question. This latest one you got picked up for what, a TV series, or what's the story there?
Hey, that's right. So Chris Pratt, he optioned it personally before it even hit shelves for the first novel. And so I got a call from an old SEAL buddy of mine in the fall of 2017. So the book's not out for a few months yet. And he calls me and he says, hey, do you remember me? Because I hadn't talked to him for a few years. And I said, of course, Jared, how's it going? And he says, well, I always wanted to call you and thank you for what you did for me in the SEAL teams. And I was racking my brain. I couldn't really think. And he says, you're the only person that helped me with transition. You brought me into your office. You sat me down, talked about transition. You introduced me to people in the private sector, and I've never forgotten it. And I always wanted to say thank you. And I was like, hey, no problem. How are things going? And he said, well, I heard you wrote a book. And I said, yeah, I have a book coming out in a few months. I have this galley copy, which is like an early edition for reviewers. I can send you if you want to take a look. And he said, yeah, I'd love to check it out, but I'd like to give one to a friend of mine. And I was like, yeah, who's that? No problem. And he says, Chris Pratt. And I said, oh, that's interesting, because as I was writing this novel, I thought of Chris Pratt playing the lead.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then I thought of Anton Fuqua directing, who did Training Day, did Tears of the Sun, did Magnificent Seven, The Equalizer, and that's who's directing it.
Wow.
Now. So Chris optioned it. I got to write the pilot script with what's called the showrunner, screenwriter, in January, February of this year. Then he took that script with Chris and with Antoine Fuqua, and then they shopped it around to Netflix and Amazon and HBO and Disney Plus and Apple, and they got in some sort of a bidding war, I guess, and now it's coming out on Amazon. So
is that where it's coming? Amazon Prime?
Amazon Prime, yeah, exactly. So depending on COVID and how that affects other people's schedules, we'll see what happens. But Chris is going to start training up soon, and he's fired up to do the firearm stuff, make that look real and authentic, start training with the blade, start rolling jiu-jitsu, get in good shape. So he really wants to keep this raw, authentic, and just like the novel. And that's why I think it stood out to Simon & Schuster, who sees thousands of these things every year, and why it really resonated with readers is because although it is fiction, the emotions that the protagonist feels are things that I felt at some point along the line in Iraq and Afghanistan attached to a real event. And I just took those emotions and then I applied them to a completely fictional thriller. So Chris wants to keep that raw authenticity and realism, and he's fired up to start training. So
now, cool. And they don't know when they're, because I know some people out in LA in the film industry and whatnot, and they're still completely on hold, right, because of COVID.
Right. Yeah, because it depends on where you film and then how much money you want to invest in the protocols that are in place to actually film. So I think it's a lot of those protocols make it not cost effective to actually put those in place, and people are just holding. But if you have enough money, maybe like Amazon does, then it's possible. But we'll see what happens come, let's say, if they start filming in March, April timeframe, what those protocols are, if they've loosened up a little bit. And then you can also go outside of LA, outside of the United States, to do some filming too. So we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I got a camera guy that used to work with me back in the day, and he's doing stuff out in LA now, and he told me exactly what you said. Anything that's getting done now, they basically have to quarantine everybody, correct? And they've been checked out, make sure everything's good to go, no COVID, and now they're in an isolated environment, completely isolated, doing their filming and doing their work, which is very unusual as it's done normally.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens. And everybody's going to continue to adapt and keep their eye on things. But by the time they actually get to that phase of where they would start filming, it'll be very interesting to see if the calls are in place, if there are any regulations. And of course, now you have all these unions also that are involved. So who knows? I don't really ask too many of those types of questions. I'm still just happy to be here in that kind of. So yeah, I'm learning a ton. I'm a sponge, and now I'm an executive producer and an advisor on the script. So while I wrote that first one with the screenwriter for these next 7 that are part of the series, then they send me the scripts. I take my red pen out, go through, circle things that are too Hollywood or morph some things around, send it back. So I get to kind of edit them, which is a cool position to be in.
Cool. Now, hey, long career in the SEALs, but I guarantee a lot of people watching this don't really know your background. You started enlisted, right? And then you transitioned to an officer. How did that work? How did that work in your career?
Yep. Well, all those things that I read in the 80s and into the early 90s, like Point Man by Patches Watson. Of course, I read Delta Force. I read anything I could possibly read on special operations, military. I read, and then you also had this the influence of popular fiction, popular culture from movies, and all those Vietnam movies that I would watch back in the 80s, early 90s. They always had this officer that showed up brand new in Vietnam, and he'd start making everybody salute, shave, press their uniforms, and then he'd lead them right into an ambush.
Yep.
And that was like takeaway from all of that was like, I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
And some of those books I read back then, they talked about how the difference between the enlisted side, the officer side, and then of course I was drawn towards the sniper side of the house. So all those books were talking about being an enlisted sniper, and so I was kind of figuring this sort of thing out. So I knew that, hey, if I wanted to be an officer one day, I wasn't going to start there. I was going to start on the enlisted side of the house. I was going to start in the mailroom essentially and work my way up. I was going to establish a reputation. I was going to be a sniper. I was going to, more importantly, learn the trade, and that would allow me to then be a better officer if I decided to go that route later on. So came in 96 boot camp, 97 buds, got to my first SEAL team in 97. And back then we thought as soon as we crossed that, probably like anybody in SF or Rangers, whatever, they think they're going to cross that, what we call the quarter deck, and show up at their first team. They're going to be handed a pager. The golden Connex box will open. You'll get all this cool gear, and you'll be out one night drinking beers with the guys. And all of a sudden the pagers will go off, and you'll go fly halfway around the world, do the Save the Princess op, and then fly back in time for beers the next night. And that was not how it was in 1997. Crossed that quarter deck, and of course, right away, it's the good-natured hazing type stuff, and then all the cleaning that you're going to do as a new guy, taking out the garbage, painting walls, cleaning bathrooms, all that sort of thing. So just to kind of welcome you to the SEAL team.
Yeah.
It wasn't really until after September 11th that we started to do the things that we thought we were going to do.
Yeah, sure, from the start. How many years were you enlisted in the SEALs?
6.5. I always throw that half on there too. So 6.5, and I probably would have gone the entire time enlisted had September 11th happened in the spring of 2001, because we got to that spring 2001. I had some interesting leadership is probably the best way to put it, as an enlisted guy, and I knew that if I wanted to do it better than it was done for me, then I had to go to OCS and become an officer. So that was my path. That was just a natural thing for me to want to do. But had September 11th happen in January, February, or March of 2001, 100% I was going to stay. I would have stayed enlisted and headed to the East Coast SEAL team and gone that route. But
wow.
I was already accepted. I already had my class update when September 11th happened, even though I was deployed. So did all that OCS package stuff in the spring and summer of 2001, deployed late summer 2001, or about a week or two before September 11th. So we were in Guam, and that's when your American Handgun article was out. It had the night on the cover. So I had that in my room on the wall in Guam. So I knew all about you well before we met in person. And I was in that room, and about midnight, people start banging on doors and phones start ringing. And we don't have TVs in our rooms back then. So we went down to the basement of the barracks where they had one TV and a couple couches, and we watched the Twin Towers fall on TV. So
wow.
That was
you knew right then. Yep, things had changed.
Yep, exactly. And we thought we were going the next day to Afghanistan. What was even more interesting, so I was the intel guy for my platoon. I was a communications guy for the platoon. I was a sniper for the platoon. But nobody knew. And I just read like 3 or 4 books on the Taliban, on Al Qaeda, on Bin Laden, and even the commanding officer didn't know what Al Qaeda, what it meant. They didn't know about the base. They didn't know about this history. They didn't know. So I gave a brief the next day, just off the top of my head, to all the senior level leadership of the platoon and the what we call a unit that's forward deployed, kind of logistics, kind of hub if you're for the SEAL teams. So I did that the next day, And we thought we were going to Afghanistan right away. Of course, it took a little while for people to get organized and figure things. And even on the way to the Middle East, we still thought we were going to go into Afghanistan. And what happened was in flight, I think, things changed. And SEAL Team 3, who was doing these shipboarding operations at the time, which were to enforce the UN oil embargo against Iraq, that's out of Kuwait, they went into Afghanistan, and we took over their mission doing the shipboard, which were the only time in my 20 years in the SEAL teams that I did anything on a ship.
And that's
those ship takedowns and actually used the SIG with the light to get in those little tight spaces. That was like the main time I remember using my SIG to actually clear were during those shipboardings, because there's all these sort of compartments everywhere and they're hiding things here, and you got to clear with this light. So so that was the time that I used that weapon system. Yeah, it was a crazy time, totally unknown. And before we did that, I got attached to what they call Commander SINCPAC Fleet. They don't call him that anymore, but it's the senior level military person for a region. And he had to go from Hawaii to Singapore to the Philippines, really, I think the day or two after 9/11, just to have meetings with his counterparts, with senior level political leaders in those countries, just to firm up some of those relationships that we might need if we're going to go and do some work in those areas in this global war on terror. So that was interesting. That was the first time that I got to do the real personal security detail type operation, and really didn't know what we were doing back then. We learned later on doing it for the interim Iraqi government, but for this mission, we just grabbed all the weapons that we could. I mean, this is the day or two after 9/11, and we just grabbed a bunch of stuff, made ourselves look, which was probably the wrong thing to do, make ourselves look tough, and had all these weapons, and really just stood outside the plane in a couple of these meetings and stood guard. But then went back to Guam, and by that time everything was palletized and getting loaded on planes, and off we went to the Middle East. And since then it was just this revolving door of work, as you know, workups and deployments, and the guys are still doing that today.
Wow. Where did you meet Monty LeClaire along the way?
Yeah, so Monty was in my task unit for my last deployment to Iraq. So we met in 2009-ish, 10, 11, 12 time frame, and worked together at SEAL Team 7 during my last workup and deployment in the SEAL teams. But what's interesting about right after 9/11, everyone thought they were going to miss it. So everybody that was at home getting ready to deploy was like, oh, we're going to miss. I can't believe it. We're not. Those guys that are deployed are so lucky. They're going to get after it. They're going to get to do the job they've been training to do. They're going to stand up and defend the country. And here we are in Coronado. Here we are in Virginia Beach, and we're going to miss it. And here we are almost 2 decades later, and the guys are still doing it. And they didn't miss it. That was not something back then. A lot of guys were worried about it, and a lot of guys actually got out to contract if during that time between September 11th and, let's say, 2006, for whatever reason, their platoons went to South America or to Africa or to the Philippines, because you still have relationships with those countries. But a lot of them then said, hey, if I'm not going to get it here in the SEAL team, I'm going to get out in contracts. And so a lot of guys at that E5, E6 level got out and started contracting. And then, of course, that dried up. We all know the way that went. That probably wasn't the best move. You got to stay in and just be prepared to go to war at any time. And at some point, that call might come.
Wow, cool. So you're actively working on the 4th book now. You haven't teased anything about it yet, no title or nothing like that?
Yep, I'm teasing it out, and I think later today, and when this goes up, it should already be out there. We'll do the cover reveal, but it's called The Devil's Hand, and really it looks at something that I wanted to explore. I've wanted to explore for a long time in an academic sense, because I lived part of it, and that is the legality, the ethics, and the morality behind targeted assassinations, something that is more closely associated with Israel than it is with us, because it's been a part of the Israeli system essentially from their inception after World War II up to today. And us, of course, we do it, but it's essentially flashpoints here or there. You hear of a drone strike here or there type thing as you're juggling your kids and going about your life. But Israel, it has been a part of that system from day one. And it's just so, they call them eliminations back there. And their Supreme Court has given explicit guidance on what they need to do if they're targeting a specific individual. So I wanted to explore that. And at the same time, I was thinking, hey, what have we been doing for this last 20 years? These guys are still going downrange. Those guys that I said were worried about missing it just a couple of minutes ago, they're still training and going downrange based off the authorization for the use of military force that came about just a few days after 9/11. So ISIS didn't exist back then, yet we use that to justify going into different countries today based off that. So I thought, what has the enemy been doing for this last 20 years? We've essentially let certain, let's say Israel, Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, and certain non-state actors. They've been in the bleachers, essentially, watching us for 20 years on the field.
Mm-hmm.
And what lessons have they been taking for watching us for 20 years? What have they incorporated into their battle plans, both state and non-state actors? What would I be taking in if I was Russia? What would I be taking in if I was Iran? What if I was a proxy force of Iran? What would I be learning over this 20-year period just watching my adversary at play? And so I thought, what have they learned? And then how are they applying that to their battle plans? And with our country right now in its current state, how we reacted to COVID, the riots that are going on, how are they seeing us, and how can they use what's happening in this country? And is it the right time? Are we weak enough for them to possibly use a proxy force to attack? So really, it's those lessons learned, kind of red selling it from the outside in based on my experience and my study. And then so both those things, the targeted assassinations and then what the enemy has learned over the last 20 years, I combine those into this fourth novel called The Devil's Hand.
Cool. Now, are you carrying on the same characters or some of the same? How's that working?
Yep. So James Reese is the protagonist, and he's a former enlisted Navy SEAL sniper. And he is at that stage when the reader meets him in the first novel, The Terminalist. He's at that stage where he's decided that this will be his last deployment to Afghanistan. He's going to get out. He's going to take care of his family. And that's essentially where I was when I got back from my last Iraq deployment and took a breath, looked around, realized I had done everything that I wanted to do in the SEAL teams. My path forward was to be a commanding officer at some point, and really commanding officers these days, although they take credit for a lot, they're back in that tactical operations center. It's the guys that are going out that are hitting these targets, very junior officers that are out there as well. But the commanding officer he's not leading the charge from the front anymore. He's back there allocating assets in the tactical operations center. And I thought that's not me. And my family needs me. They put up with a lot over this last, at the time, 16 years. And it is time to get out and take care of them. So I got to take all those emotions, all those feelings, and apply them to this narrative. So that's where the reader meets James Reese in the first novel, and they connected. And I really wanted a likable character. So I wanted a guy, because I remember Magnum growing up. Everybody loved Magnum, and he was likable. He could joke. He had these friends from Vietnam. They're dealing with some post-traumatic stress stuff, as we would call it today. It was where they're the first show that showed Vietnam veterans in a positive light as positive members of society without ignoring what they'd experienced in Vietnam. But everybody loved that show, and I thought it was because Tom Selleck did such a good job being a likable character, but he could flip that switch and he could get the job done. And that's what I wanted. I wanted people to connect with someone that they'd want to sit down and have a beer with, have a coffee with, that was relatable, because he's going through different transitions like everyone has to do in life, regardless if it's military or not. And so it really resonated with people. So yeah, James Reese is the protagonist and will continue to be for as long as people want to continue reading about him.
Good deal. Now, I know you've done some travel to research and develop some stuff. So have you done that on all the books? How does that work in terms of you bringing together some of the stuff you learn on your excursions overseas and in different places?
Yeah. So luckily for the first one, I had been to Afghanistan, I'd been to Iraq, I'd been in the military, I'd been a sniper. So all those things and the locations in this country that I use in the novel, I'd been to those places as well. So a lot of it's Southern California, it's LA, it's Florida, it's New York, it's an island off New York called Fisher's Island. So all those places I'd been to. And some of them I went to the end off this island off New York, and I was there. I walked the route that James Reese walks at the end. I looked at the trees, thought, what time of year is he going to be here? Are these things still? What are they going to be like then? All of that. So I do like to bring the flavor, local flavor, into the pages of my novels, and not just do it at a keyboard, not just research and use Google Earth, although those are very useful tools. For the second one, True Believer, I hadn't been to Mozambique. And that was going to be a very important part of this novel for me. And I took a risk with the second novel, because usually if you had something that was successful for the first one, you just want to redo that again, because it's so difficult to get something that does well in the show. But I took a risk because I didn't want to be looked at as, hey, a one-trick pony, and hey, he just took this revenge theme and he dropped it in Africa, or he dropped it in Europe, or he dropped it in China. So I knew the protagonist had to go on a journey. He needed to learn how to live again after the events of the first novel. And I thought, where's a good place to go? Where can you really go off the grid and find purpose, find a mission in life again, which everyone has to do, dealing with any transition, not just military. That's our experience is moving from that into the private sector. But everybody's going to go through a divorce or a death of a loved one, or they're going to change jobs or whatever it might be. So everyone's going to go through transitions, and everyone's going to get knocked down. And they're going to, life is about how you get back up and keep moving forward. So I think that part was relatable, but I needed to bring that local flavor in from Mozambique. So even before I had a deal on the first novel, before I'd even submitted it to Simon & Schuster, I was flying to Mozambique and spent some time on the ground there, working with the local trackers, working with professional hunters, learning about the Chinese influence in the area with illegal and legal mining operations, the poaching side of the house. And that's where I really developed, okay, James Reese, his next mission is going to be taking these old skills and repurposing them in Africa to target poachers. And that's where he's going to learn to live again. And then from there, the story takes off. But I need to get him to that place. I can't just have him all of a sudden be fine after the events of the first book. I have to get him to this place where he finds that next purpose in life. So went to Mozambique, got to do that. And then before that second book came out, I went back to Africa and went down to South Africa and helped train up an anti-poaching unit down there that's focused primarily on preserving, protecting some of the last rhino on Earth. So, and these guys had fascinating backgrounds. They were older, so they caught the tail end of the bush wars, and they grew up tracking animals, hunting animals to provide for their family, provide for their village. So they had these amazing skills from that. And then from the bush wars, they got the man tracking from that. And that it was incredible to talk to them about that sort of thing. But after the bush wars had died out in the early to mid 90s, now South Africa has all these people coming back that don't have jobs, but what they do have is a lot of combat experience. And so they got back and the government said, okay, we need to figure something out, something we can offer these guys to continue them down this path that provides for their family. And really, they brought them into the National Police Force to do what we would look at as CSI, so crime scene investigation. So they took really the psychology of tracking in the bush, brought that to an urban environment, got really into the psychology of tracking, not just following drops of blood in an urban environment, but getting into the mind of their prey, of that suspect. Where's he going to go next? Who does he know? What we call establishing a pattern of life on him to then pluck him out and give him a little interview. So they took then they aged out of that. So now they've been brought into these different anti-poaching units, some run by the government, but a lot private. And they brought into these units, and the one I went to was a private unit, privately funded. And they got to take all that lifetime's worth of experience and apply it to protecting rhinos. So they transitioned over from some other weapon systems, and we're now using the Glock and an M4. So I got to go over some stuff with them on that, some vehicle interdiction type stuff. And I learned a ton really from them about man tracking and the psychology of man tracking. So I learned a lot more from them than they did from me. But I got to take all that and weave that into that second and the third novel as well.
Now, didn't you go somewhere else for the third novel?
I did. I went to Kamchatka, Russia. So once again, I knew, all right, I haven't been to Kamchatka. I've read a ton about it. I've always wanted to go. This is where the big final chapters of Savage Son take place. So I got to get over there. So I did. And there's 1 month a year you can fly to Kamchatka, Russia. So for those who don't know, it's just south of Siberia, far eastern side of Russia. And there's 1 month a year you can get there from Alaska. And you can fly some Russian airline, and they fly 1 day a week to Alaska, back, and then another week to Alaska, back. So you get 4 shots. So you're either staying there for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks. Or if you miss it, then you're going all the way back through Moscow, all the way across Siberia, which is a crazy flight to get essentially all the way back around the world if you're coming from near the west coast of the United States. Or it's like an hour and a half flight from Anchorage. Wow. So went over there, and it was a hunt in the backcountry with someone who had military experience in Russia and intelligence out of the house experience in Russia. So I got to kind of pick his brain a little bit about that side of the house. So we were on an active military installation there that he had access to. So I spent a week in the backcountry out there on a brown bear hunt, and ended up, my wife is thrilled. Just outside this door, the bear just showed up from Kamchatka. So yeah, she's thrilled, as you can imagine. But yeah, I got a ton of information there that I wouldn't have gotten from a Google search, and got to weave that into the storyline. So as long as I can, I'm going to continue to go to these places, do this research, talk to the people. And a lot of times you don't even know what you're after until you're on the
Sure,
ground.
yeah. I mean, you've not been there, right?
Exactly. So I'll continue to do that. And luckily for this fourth one, when COVID hit, I mean, I was supposed to be in Africa right now. I was supposed to be in Zambia. But luckily, it wasn't totally necessary for this fourth novel. And it's just that it's close to Angola. But I've been to most of the places that I'm writing about. This fourth one is more continental, United States based, bringing in history from really from the early 50s in the Middle East to today. But it's really that history that develops the characters, and the action takes place here on the home front.
Cool. How long were you in Russia? How long were you up there?
Just a week. Yeah, it was either a week or 2 or 3 or 4, and I already had a brown bear hunt in Alaska scheduled for later that month, and a few other trips. One was out to SIG. So yeah, my wife was like, "All right, that's you're deployed in the military. You're not in the military anymore. Spend a little more time at home." So yeah, 1 week, but that was good. That was good.
Hey, let's talk about some of the people you're affiliated with. I know you've made a lot of contacts in the industry and you're a loyal guy. Who are some of the companies and some of the people that you're kind of affiliated with in the industry that I know you've weaved a lot of it into your books and whatnot? Who are some of those people and companies?
Yeah, so it was very natural for me to weave gear into the novels, for me to talk about it now on these social media platforms, because I've been a gear guy my entire life. Well before my time in the military, I was always looking at, hey, how can I go farther or faster into the backcountry? I was just always drawn to gear for whatever reason. It's very natural. So when I got to the SEAL teams, I got to take that to a whole nother level and take some of what I'd learned before. Because when I got to the SEAL teams, I was shocked at how little they knew about operating in the backcountry specifically. Going up to Alaska, seeing the boots that they gave us back then, the backpacks they gave us back then, it was ridiculous. It was just someone going to an REI or even a worse, like a Big Five Sporting Goods and picking things off the shelf. Like, it was atrocious. Now it's awesome. Now the training's incredible. But back then, not so much. So I've always been a gear guy and continue to be outside the military as well. So as I started writing, when I, just like you, when I see somebody and I see, okay, look at shoes they're wearing. Okay, look at that belt. How are they carrying that 1911? Or what other pistol are they carrying? What's that symbol on their hat? What glasses do they have? Like, it tells a story about them. And so I wanted to take that, because when I see someone and I learn a lot about them just by looking at their gear, well, I tell a story about a character as well by what they're wearing. So it was very natural for me to weave those things into the novel to tell a story about those people. Like, it's different if you drive a Porsche or if you drive a 1988 Land Cruiser. Like, there's different, it tells you something different about what that person is interested in. So I use those things as character development tools. So SIG has been fantastic. I mean, I love SIG because I carried one for so long, for the whole time that I was in the military. It was the 226, was my primary sidearm. So I shot that a lot. And I shot that on the range. Even the stuff that I would do with you, with other people that would come pass through town while I was still in the military, I'd go out to the range and I was shooting that thing. So I was always trying to bring my skills up to the next level, always trying to improve, always trying to get better. And then just naturally, as I got out, and I never called SIG and said, hey, if I put you in the book, well, what does this look like? I just naturally put the sunglasses that I wear in the book, because SEALs wear gaiters. So I always have these, been on every deployment with me, so it was natural for me to do that. And I also want to help friends and people that I had relationships with. It was just natural for me to do that. So SIG's been incredible, and it's just it's a natural relationship. I'm not sponsored or anything like that. They're all very natural. Black Rifle Coffee has been amazing, and for those guys, it was really cool to see them, because we got out kind of near the same time, within a few years of one another, and I got to watch them and see what they did as they transitioned out of the military, and how they made use of some of these platforms that weren't available to people if they'd gotten out 20 years ago, 30 years ago. How do you build a business? How do you connect with other people? And is it important who you connect with? And just it was just amazing to see them grow this thing from nothing, from a garage, a passion for coffee, and grow it into what it is today. And it continues to grow. So I watched that and thought, what lessons can I learn here about transition, about building a business, about the veteran community, and how can I apply that to something that hasn't been applied to before, which is the publishing world. So I took a lot of those lessons. Of course, I talked to you. I asked you a lot of questions about transition, and of course, you've been amazing to me for so long, and I sincerely appreciate everything.
Well, thank you.
So yeah, this gear that I use in the novels, that I post on social media, it's all companies, people that I have a close relationship with. So those are probably the big ones. But anything that I post or talk about or use, it's in the books, it's for a reason, to develop a character, and then if it's on social media, it all comes off with very authentic, which it is, because I'm testing something. I just give my honest opinion of it, and if I hate something, I'm probably not going to use it.
Sure.
I'm not going to give it back. But yeah, everybody's been so fantastic, and it was all these relationships that I didn't intentionally develop. It was just natural, because I started going to SHOT Show, let's say back in, I think 2003, 2004, one of those two anyway, when the tactical side was still one room and small.
Yeah.
And then it expanded a year or two later, but it was still like hunting and camouflage and, Bass Pro Shop type stuff, and a little room with some tactical nylon and some black rifles. And of course now that's most of the show.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And companies like Ruger and Smith & Wesson and other companies which weren't making ARs or whatnot, now everybody makes them. So you're right. It's kind of bizarre, because I remember that era of SHOT Show. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. I already knew people from the industry because of going to the range and shooting, and going to Thunder Ranch and just doing things on the private side of the house. And I always wanted, being a gear guy, I wanted my guys to go downrange with the best stuff that was out there. And I knew that the private sector, for most, if not maybe on some of the technical side of the house, but is most of the time a little bit ahead of the military, particularly the procurement process. And so if I wanted to know what was out there or what was being developed, then I needed to go to SHOT Show.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
So I went on my own dime, got my own hotel rooms, and I just naturally met people, and then got on the range with them later, and these relationships developed over a 20 plus year period. And then so as I got out, they already knew me. They knew my family. They knew that I had this passion for writing from an early age. They knew the whole backstory, and they wanted to help. And so it was just very natural to partner on a few things, and I think that's really helped. So like SIG and Black Rifle and these different archery companies and Gators and these different companies have all been fantastic. But it's not because I just called up and had a platform. I had zero platform when I started. I had nothing. I had no social media presence whatsoever. I stayed away from it. Never wanted it in the military. But when I got out, I realized, hey, that's my storefront. Like these days, like this is my storefront. I can look to Simon & Schuster to do a few things, but if you expect your publisher to do everything for you, you're going to probably be disappointed.
Yeah.
You have to take ownership of that. And for me, I looked at, hey, these guys made an investment in me. I don't come from politics. I don't come from a sports background. I have zero platform whatsoever. They invested in me. They took a chance. They took a risk. And now it's up to me to prove to them that it was a good investment. And so I took ownership of all of that, and I started looking at social media stuff. Hey, how do you build these things? What's important there? What I like, what I don't like, and let's build it in authentic and a real way. So that's my storefront. I don't have a store where you can walk in, but I look at social media as that storefront. So if someone walked in, and like if I had a small town general store in the middle of the USA, and someone came in and wanted directions to the interstate, well, I give them directions to the interstate. And that's kind of how I look at social media. I treat people like that. If they want to buy a six-pack, I point them towards the refrigerator. Conversation with them, and then they go out, and hopefully they say, you know what, that guy was awesome. I want to tell my friend to come to that store. And maybe they don't, but that's kind of how I treat it. And the same way, if someone comes in and they start breaking things and they start harassing the other customers, well, I'm throwing them out in real life, and I get blocked them on social media.
Yes, sir.
So that's just how it goes. But that's kind of how I look at it, as my storefront, as a way to engage and as a way to thank people, because I am so grateful that they took a risk as a reader on a new author or a listener for the audiobook, and then they told a friend. And this whole thing was really built grassroots, because my Joe Rogan podcast didn't come out till after the third book hit shelves, after the big week of that counts for the New York Times list. Chris Pratt announced it after. And I was hoping that they would both do something beforehand, but they didn't. And now I like that they didn't, because it was all grassroots. It was hunters, it was tactical shooters, gun people, readers. It was all this grassroots effort. Read it and tell a friend. So it was the modern version of hanging out around the water cooler for a water break or on a smoke break at work, and telling your friend that you just read something cool and they might like it. Well, now that's social media, and they might have, or they might have 28 million. And everything in between. So that's kind of how I look at that. And it was all grassroots to get to this level, and I'm sincerely appreciative.
Yeah, excellent. You know, your Black Rifle Copy Company is a good example of veterans that have really taken something and ran with it. And they've done a great job, really great job. And I see their impact beyond what you'd see in the military. I'll see people drinking that, and I know the kind of a little bit of the backstory, and it's just completely out of the left field. You'd be like, I'd never expect them to be drinking that coffee. But yeah, they've done very well.
No, it's fantastic. And I mean, they recognized a gap, just like we would on the battlefield. They capitalized on momentum. But they saw that gap, like, okay, there's Starbucks, and then there's kind of everyone else. So what if you really, don't agree? Well, one, if you don't like that kind of coffee because they're pushing out so much, and now I know a little bit about it, now you just, essentially burn coffee with some of those bigger companies because they just need to get so much out. Well, how do you do like a small roaster type thing, really good coffee, you're really into it, you know the backstory, you know where everything comes from, but you're also proud to be an American. You also believe in our freedom. You also believe that we should be able to defend ourselves from someone that attacks us or from our government, that from a tyrannical government. So they're all in on that side of the house. That is their audience, and but it all comes down to that base product, like anything has to. Like anything that you put out there is obviously top notch. If you're on the range with somebody, it's awesome instruction. Like the product has to be great. Just like with the books, like everything else supports that, but the book has to be fantastic. So for them, their coffee, that product, that has to be top notch, and then everything else supports
falls into place.
Yep, and they've done like you said, they've done so much for the veteran community. They've done so much. I forget how many veterans that they actually employ, and of course, it's not just that employment. It is what those people can then do with that experience if they move forward. They can either stay with Black Rifle for so long, or they can get out and do something on their own. So they've just done a fantastic job across the board.
So a couple questions before we start throwing it out. One of the things I'd throw things over to Justin here at the end for him to weigh in with any questions. How many hours a day do you work on your books? How many hours?
Yeah, so it's different every day, and that's because up to this point, I've treated it as a startup. And that means that I had to be very flexible. I had to adapt. If something like this comes up, I said, it's yes. And obviously for you, it's yes anytime. But I had to say yes to all these different emerging opportunities, because you never know where one's going to lead or who's going to listen to one that's going to lead to something else. So it's been a garage startup, essentially. And that means that I have been at a full-on sprint for the last few years, and I've been pivoting, adapting constantly. So I'll go for a full day of writing from 6 in the morning to 10 at night when I need to. Or I'll do not anything. Like today, I haven't written yet today because I was doing some prep this morning for an interview later tonight. I have to drive down to Salt Lake for it, and it's a big one. So so anyway, today will probably not be any writing. I wrote an op-ed today that deals with the hypocrisy behind these government officials who have 24/7 armed, taxpayer-funded security details who also want to take our firearms, and the hypocrisy of that. So I wrote that yesterday evening and editing it this morning, and I'll do that a little bit this afternoon. So today will probably be no writing. But then tomorrow morning, and once again, with juggling kids and those schedules, I'll get 3, 4, 5, 6 hours in probably tomorrow. But at this stage, now that I'm at this stage, I feel that it's time to kind of take a breath and put some more processes in place that allows me to be more effective and efficient with my time rather than just pivoting and running.
Yeah, 100 mile an hour.
Yep, exactly, and have a schedule and have a writing time. And if an interview or something doesn't fit within that writing time, then it's a no, and we just reschedule it for another time. So I'm getting to that stage and but I've been so programmed to sprint so hard for so long and to be so adaptable and so flexible that it's hard to make that transition. But I'm doing that, and that's kind of where I'm going to be here in the next. As I move into the fall, it's time to put some of those processes in place, I think.
So, and when does your next book drop? Or do you have that time frame nailed down or no?
Yep, April 13th of 2021. So that's on the calendar. April is my time every year for the foreseeable future, and it's a good time for me to come out. Some of those guys that are more established come out around Thanksgiving for that Christmas push. Other guys come out for that summer push, and those are all names that everyone knows that are well established, have been around for 20, 30, some 40 years. So springtime is a good time for me to come out. It's working out well.
Cool. Justin, you got anything for Jack Carr?
Yeah, couple things. I'm curious, James Reese, the name, story behind it. How'd you come up with it?
There is, and it's classified, so I keep that one in my.
Okay. I've seen you post on social media, like you've been posted pictures of being at Thunder Ranch. Are there any other? Who do you train with? And who have you trained with, or that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I was lucky in that before I went in the military, I wanted to train myself up, and this is before internet time. So if you were looking for a martial arts studio, you went to an actual phone book and you went through and you looked through there. And so I was very lucky that I got into martial arts very early because I realized, hey, what do I need to be good at here? Well, I need to be good at fighting. Okay. Where I grew up, I shot, I went to the range with my dad, that sort of thing. But it wasn't like tactical training. It was going out and just shooting some cans type deal. But I realized, hey, I need to learn how to fight. I don't know how to fight. So boxing and then Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, early 90s. Like I was early on board, but I was just in tune with that community, with that martial art type community, with Jeet Kune Do and Filipino martial arts and that blade work, all that sort of thing. And then naturally, when I got to about 18, I realized, okay, now I can start making some of my own decisions here, and I need to look into I need to learn how to shoot. Like I've shot some cans, but I need to learn who's out there that can teach me how to shoot. Oh, there's this place called Thunder Ranch. Oh, that's pretty cool in Texas. And this guy Clint Smith used to work at Gunsight. Oh my, Jeff Cooper. I've read those books. They were all like aspirational type things for a kid, though. Like you read about them in Guns and Ammo. You read about them in these magazines, but you couldn't go there. Maybe someday, but so I tracked down a former special forces guy, he was part of something called Project Delta in Vietnam, and just an amazing guy, sniper. And I got out, worked for LAPD, and then went to work for some other government agencies. But he was amazing, and he had a friend also who had that same background, not the police background, but the SF background for 20 plus years in special forces. So I got hooked up with these guys, and they taught me how to shoot. One of them had a shooting school, and the other one was just his friend who was retired and kind of took me under his wing. We rented cars. He taught me how to do bootleg turns and all that sort of thing. Taught me how to shoot. Taught me things that you weren't going to learn in the military about working a shotgun, working an 870, working a wheel gun, working a revolver. And when I did get to the SEAL teams, we actually did have revolvers for my first couple of years. The 686 was coming up over the beach. Some of the auto loading weapon systems didn't really operate very well when you got a bunch of sand and water and dirt and all that stuff in there, as you do when you get tumbled in the surf zone. So typically that Smith & Wesson 686 would work. So we did have a little bit of that. But these guys taught me how to do that. We got locks, taught me how to pick locks. I mean, it was amazing. It was a dream come true. And this was all prior to getting into the military. So I owe those guys so much, but more than just the skills, more than just how to shoot, they taught me how to think logically. And up to that point, I've been kind of like self-educated as far as logic goes. But they really taught me how to think logically. Taught me a lot about Vietnam, a lot about our freedom. Like they put things in perspective for me, and I'll forever be indebted to them for that, because it comes across in my novels. It's a big part of who I am and have been since I met those guys. And really, up until that point, I was like searching. I knew there was something out there. I knew there was this logic thing. I knew I was connected to my country because just because that was just natural. And my grandfather was killed in World War II. He was a Corsair pilot, killed off Okinawa in 1945. So I grew up with his medals and pictures of him with his squadron and his plane and the silk maps they gave aviators back then and all that stuff. And so I was always just hungry for knowledge. And that continued into the SEAL teams. So while I was in, then I would go out and I'd track down people who were experts in their field and want to learn from them. And when I got to a point where I could influence who we trained with, well, I wanted to bring in people from outside our silo, because we'd go to Mid-South Institute of Self-Defense. It was awesome down there, running through those houses, fantastic. But we didn't really send guys outside of that too often. And I wanted to know, hey, what are the guys at Larry's old command doing? Like, what are the SF guys doing? What are the Rangers doing? What are the guys just in the private sector doing? They've got people with SWAT backgrounds, police backgrounds, or private citizens who are training and are carrying every day in a regular work environment. What can I learn from them? So I reached out to you, Larry. I'm like, can you come teach us? You're like, I'm busy, but maybe bring Pat Mack in. He's kind of SEAL-ish, and so that was fantastic. So I'd like to do that sort of thing, but I was always going out. If you came to town, I'm going up to see you. Pat's in town, I'm going to see him. And I drove out to a former police guy that was with Morgan Consulting. I think he's probably retired by now, because I wanted to learn how to run an auto-loading shotgun. I knew the 870. I love the 870. But I wanted to learn how to fight with that autoloader. So the Benelli M1 Super 90 I had. How do I run this thing effectively? So I went out to Arizona and trained with him. So I've always been a big proponent of people continuing to train, continuing to improve, and then take lessons learned from other people that are out there learning things and bring it in to your own organization. So I try to do that today. That was a very long way of saying I try to get on the range as much as I can, but today is a lot of this. This is the typing phase for me. I'm a writer now, but I still try to get on the range as much as I can. I'm fairly close, living in Utah to Oregon. It's not a bad drive, and there's no cities between here and there really. After you get out of Salt Lake, so I can zip out there to Thunder Ranch and get on the range with Clint Smith, and they have some instructors they bring in as well. So I get to get on the range with them when I can. But I'm always trying to improve my skills, always trying to learn, always trying to. I figure it's my responsibility. I've always thought that it's my responsibility to protect this gift of life, not just mine, but my family's. And if I want to do that as effectively as I possibly can, well, I got to continue to improve. I can't just say, "Oh, I'm good. I was a SEAL. I'm good." No, because the typical military guy, even SEAL, is like okay with a pistol, maybe. Like they'll be pretty good with the M4 because that's our primary weapon system. But you can have some guys that are really good with the M4, and all they do is train for that block, and they do some SIG stuff, but maybe they're not very good. Well, then they don't touch that for another few months.
Yeah.
And they're not gun people. People just always assume that SEALs or SF guys or whatever are gun people. And well, maybe they only did. They only know that M4 weapon system. They only know the light that they were issued. They only know the laser that they were issued. They only know that, and they don't know anything else about it. They don't know about the history. They haven't really looked into the importance of the Second Amendment, why it exists. And if they weren't really good on the SIG, well, that's okay. I got my M4. And they didn't really take an interest in that. They might be a big air guy. They might know, I'm not an air person. They might know everything about jumping all these different rigs at all these different altitudes, at all these different jumping barrels, jumping people, jumping dogs. But for me, my thing is I've always been attracted to what is very primal, what is very visceral, and in this case, what I can transfer over as a citizen to protect my family, to protect my neighbor, to protect myself. So that was a long way of saying I try to get on the range as much as I possibly can, but these days, a lot of typing.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
That's all I got.
Awesome. Thanks, brother, for coming. Absolute best of luck. I'm glad to see things are going well for you. Always enjoy seeing you on social media, and hopefully we'll be able to see you again at SHOT Show sometime. Don't know if SHOT Show 2021 is going to go off or not. It kind of looks like a roll of the dice.
I mean, imagine last year we thought, hey, I'll see you for sure next year at SHOT if I don't see it. And now we're talking, and even in this last spring when COVID first hit, we're like, we'll be good by summer, for sure by fall. And now we're talking about SHOT Show, maybe not going. It's a crazy time, for sure. But no, thank you so much for everything. And people can see over my shoulder here, other shoulder, just opposite. Those are all my Vickers guides. You can see that.
Thank you.
Those things, they're so close because one, they're awesome. And two, I haul these things out all the time as I'm writing the weapons-specific chapters in my novels. So I don't want to mess something up. So first I go there, and then if I'm a little confused about something or I have a question, then I'm emailing or texting Larry. And so, hey, thank you so much for doing this.
You're welcome.
For your mentorship, and for always being there. It means more to me than I can possibly express.
Well, thank you, brother. I greatly appreciate it, and just wish you the absolute best.
Thanks so much. Hopefully we'll get on the range here together soon.
Yeah. All right, brother. We'll catch you later.
Take care.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed it. That's my buddy Jack Carr. Great dude. One of the best people I've ever met in the firearms industry. I absolutely think the world of the guy. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you check out his books. This is a guy that is on the rise. This is a star rising. Jack Carr, great dude. Have a good one. We'll see you next time right back here. LAV out. To get 10% off all plans, use promo code LAV10 at CCW Safe's website and go to CCW Safe's YouTube channel for more great content. Hey, Larry Vickers here. I hope you enjoyed this video. Click here to subscribe to the Vickers Tactical channel and take time out to check out some of our other favorite videos.